If we continue as we are now, we see the situation is not improved. And it just will provide additional constant pressure on the rents, on the students, and on the reputation of the country as such.
Before I introduce Martin Varga from Bonard, I want to introduce Nathan Speedy from Forstay. Forstay is a marketing and leasing firm active in both the US and Canada. They've been actively involved in SHURE GTA over the past 2 days. Nathan, take a couple minutes to talk about Forstay and then subsequently introduce Martin from Varga. So good morning, welcome everyone to SHURE GTA Day 2.
Thank you very much, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here this morning and introduce Martin for his presentation over the Canadian market overview for student housing in Canada. As Brian mentioned, I'm here from Forstay. We work with colleges and universities across North America, hundreds of institutions to provide student housing services from software to managed housing. We have about half a dozen of us here milling around through the conference today. So if you find one of us, come say hello or join us in the other room at our booth over there. Delighted to welcome Martin Varga to the stage. Martin is he had joined Bonard in 2020. He leads the company's engagement in rented residential asset classes. His expertise and focus are within student housing, senior living, co-living, and other rented residential sectors. At Bonard, Martin assists global investors, fund managers, developers, and operators with data-driven expansion to new asset classes and territories, as well as in-depth analysis and assessment strategies and opportunities in order to mitigate investment risk, increase ROI, and allow for more accurate decisions. Bonard provides excellent data through a number of different platforms. If you aren't subscribed to their daily market update email campaigns, do subscribe. They give great information every single morning. Follow them on LinkedIn for all of their online webinars. Lots of great content, always very exciting. Here's Martin.
Thank you. Thank you so much for a warm introduction. Once again, it's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Martin. I'm coming from Bonard, and it's my great pleasure to present a little bit of Canadian figures today, not only where the Canada is now, but where the Canada might be heading in coming years, and more importantly, how Canada compares to some other countries that we are monitoring across the world, and what might be the examples that Canada can learn from to basically enhance the student housing accommodation across the country. So before probably getting to the presentation, try to switch that. Okay. A few words about us, even something was already mentioned, but for the ones that are not familiar with our brand yet, we are a global research advisory firm providing unbiased and independent assessments and advisory for living sectors, which includes student housing, co-living, multifamily and BTRs, but also senior living. So we're basically covering the full life cycle of the tenant from becoming of student to becoming of the elderly people and senior. Our main remit is to guide be it institutional capital, investors, pension funds, or other part of investment roles to invest in various regions, in various countries. But we also work with the developers, which can be operating internationally or regionally. We're helping to determine the product, what to build, how to build it right, what's the micro location suitable for, what's the better asset class that might be working better in this area, and so on. And we, of course, also support the banks for the financing, as well as the operators and other groups that are involved in student housing. So far, it's about 100 people spread across offices in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America. We've been working on more than 600 projects globally that are coming from the student sector. And we're now covering about 264 markets, which are coming mainly from Europe, from Australia, Latin America, and as well as Canada now. And let's take a closer look at Canada. We've been in the market for about 10 years now, but more on the educational side, where we help the universities, associations, and so on. Now, about 4 years back, we decided it's about the right time to enter the accommodation side as well, where we started to map about 15 cities back there now we enlarged the database to 24 cities across the Canadian market. It includes almost 900 operational purpose-built student accommodation, both on and off campus, all the pipeline, and as well the universities and colleges that are spread in this region. We're going to discuss more about this data today, and basically we want to show not only where the market is, but also where it might be heading, and pinpoint and highlight some of the key figures. So let's start with the demand, as this is the main indicator. And first, we need to understand what is there to please, of course. Here is just a quick statistics. So we have a 5-year CAGR, so compound annual growth rate, for both total students and international students in Canada. We can see that both graphs are growing over the years. We see that total students are growing all over the years, but even bigger figures we see at international students. So within the past 5 years, annually, we saw this number of international students growing on average 10% per year, almost 10%. If we compare the statistics with other sizable markets like United States, like UK, like Australia, you can see that Canada is achieving the biggest number. It's the blue figure, that is the Canadian one. So it's 9.9% CAGR for the last 5 years. The second market that has been competing a little bit with that was UK, where we've seen 8.5 CAGR, comparing to Australia and US, which was actually not increasing, but the other way around. We said that Canada is achieving the highest increases in international students across the biggest educational market in the world. And this most likely will continue because when we take a look at the migration policies, university initiatives, and so on, we see that how huge importance of international students is for the country, and how many of those students might continue to grow to come to the country. Looking at it at a city level basis, when we take a look at those 24 markets that I mentioned for you at the beginning, here the comparison how the total student population grew in the last 4 years, and where have we seen the bigger or smaller amounts of growth. From the first point of view, you can see that there's much more green than red, and if there is some red dots, it's relatively small decrease. The green ones, we see the bigger increases in cities like Victoria, Kelowna, as well Windsor, but of course also the most sizable markets like Toronto or Montreal. And if we take a look at international students, that's slightly different, right? So we see much more green on the map, and we see not only the higher single-digit growth, but also some double-digit growth in some places like Guelph, like Windsor, and so on. So we see how huge this growth of international students is across the multiple jurisdictions and multiple cities across the country. But it's not only about international, and more importantly about Canada. We see international is growing, but there is still a huge amount of domestic students. Those domestic students indeed not always need accommodation, because they might be living in a town where they study, they might be living in their houses, but we also measure domestic mobile in Canada to understand how many of those Canadian students are looking for accommodation. And together with international students, create a pool of potential tenants for the student accommodation. Looking at a map, the gold ones represent the international students, while the blue ones are the domestic students. You can see the proportion of these students are still heavily driven by domestic students. In some places, we see this proportion is being roughly 15 to 20%. So there is still big domestic student population, but we of course expect this ratio to be changed with next year, considering the growth of international students coming to the country. And how does that reflect in accommodation? So looking at the graphs, looking at the data, we can easily say that demand is there, and it's growing, and it will most likely continue to grow. But looking at the accommodation side, and what's the provision rate? So what's the beds versus students ratio? How many beds are there for students? We see the provision in Canada sits barely at 10%. Looking at the UK, you're going to be seeing almost 30% provision. So it's 3 times more than we see in Canada. UK is in Europe the most mature market, so I will use that a lot as benchmark because this is a also sizable market, more than 2 million students like Canada, and there has been a lot of activities, a lot of capital flowing in, a lot of institutional money, and a lot of off-campus beds that have been delivered. And talking about off-campus in specific, you can see this provision rate in Canada is 4 times smaller than in United Kingdom. So total number of the provision is 3 times smaller, but off-campus is even worse in this situation. Here is kind of a breakdown of the provision rate per city. First one is the total provision, so how many beds are there for all the students. Half of the markets are barely reaching 10%, so especially sizable markets like Montreal, where we see the provision sits at 5.2%, Toronto at 8.8%, which are the very sizable markets, has a big demand pool of students, not even reaching the 10% benchmark as an average for Canada, while some of the countries, especially Waterloo, which is kind of a 35.6, this is the kind of number that you're going to see more in kind of UK cities spread across the country, which is the more mature and more competitive market. So given that, you can see how much of the place is there for growth for all of the city, and especially for off-campus, because if we take a look at a off-campus beds, here is the off-campus provision rate. So on the left side, you have domestic mobile students, so the Canadian students that are looking for accommodation, together with international students who are coming into the country. Versus how many of those off-campus beds are there for them? Well, Victoria and Windsor has nothing. We basically see 0%, while many of the other countries are, on the average, somewhere between 5 to 7%. Some probably just 2 cities, Guelph and Waterloo, reaching 25%, but you can already see that even the provision rate on the first side has been achieving to some degree 10% in some cities. Taking a look at it from the private point of view and from the off-campus, we're not close enough at all. And here is kind of a proportion and ratio of campus versus on-campus beds in Canada in total. So now currently we see 29% of the beds that are operational in Canada are off campus, while almost more than 17% are on-campus beds. Looking at the more major markets, even Australia or UK, you're going to see the proportion of off-campus beds reaching 60% or more than that. So we need more beds, but we need more off-campus, more better quality accommodation as well. How does it compare in those cities? Many sizable cities like Vancouver or even Toronto are not even reaching this 30% ratio that you saw at the previous slide. Some cities like Waterloo or even Kelowna are a little bit higher. Maybe Waterloo is the only city that is meeting the benchmark of more major markets. But other than that, we see many of those cities that are not even reaching 30 or 40%, and are sitting somewhere in between 20 to 30% of off-campus beds provision across all the cities. And just the last statistics for operational student housing that's out there before we go to what needs to be built and how to build. When you take a look at the average size of the off-campus assets or on-campus assets in Canada, you will see that the off-campus PBSA on average offers 139 beds assets, and this is the average scale per country. On-campus is slightly higher, so we see 240 beds. Comparing to more major market, and when we usually work with those institutional money, pension funds, who are well experienced in other countries, it's many times the game of the scale. Because usually more efficient buildings are starting at 300 plus beds, where you can manage more effectively your OPEXs, bring up some NOI margins, and you can manage your property more effectively from the feasibilities that we've seen and from the conversation and investments that we did with some other investors across the globe. This is not necessarily the transactable stock here. 139 beds is not the most efficient bed that many of the institutional investors will look at. So if we take a look at the 300 plus beds, we see only 60% of off-campus residences falling into this category. So we need to build more, but we need to build more also kind of a sizable and scalable accommodation, because what we usually have discussions also in these forums, the country needs more beds. For this, we need more capital. So we would, of course, be happy to have more capital coming into the country, but to have the opportunity for them, we need to have scalable and sizable investment opportunities for them. And here is the future PBSA outlook. So how the pipeline looks like now in Canada. You can see that it's still about 46 assets that we see that are coming to the market. They're either in planning or under construction. And about 16 of those assets are off campus, while 30 of the assets are on campus. So even the pipeline remains the same, like the operational story. We still see more developments coming from the on-campus point of view rather than off-campus. But even looking at the numbers of all the stock that should be coming by the end of 26, together with number of beds, we don't see such an improvement in this pipeline. If we take a look at how much it affects the provision rate that I've mentioned to you before, which sits at 10.7%, considering that we would open all of those assets, the provision would increase by 50 basis points. So it would not be 10.7, but it would be 11.2. Well, not such a blessing. If we take a look at it off campus only, we see only 10 basis points, even more sad situation here. So we see that this situation is not improving, and with this pipeline we have now currently in place, the provision will not necessarily change, and the same, of course, which correlates with the rent growth and the pressure from the demand that will continue to grow. So we need to build more, and we need to build, of course, diverse and multiple products, because Canada is in such an early stage. Like we've seen France 5 years ago, like we've seen many other places that has been in the same stage like Canada is now, and we had a lot of experience from guiding the capital through various cycles of the market. But if we compare where Canada is now from the product offering, what's out there for students, what type of accommodation they have, versus what is available in the rest of the world. Predominant product for Canada is single room. So it is basically the single rooms that usually share the bathroom or share the kitchen. If you take a look at a proportion of different accommodation type in the world, you're going to be seeing single rooms as well there, but you're going to be also see more split towards single studios, single room, smaller proportion of the shared rooms. But single studio has been something that has been predominant through all over Europe, through all over Australia, all the new developments. It is some of the product we're seeing that investors and tenants like the most. So we need to build more, but we need to build also different type of accommodation. Maybe to put it in kind of hotel terminology, the Canada is such an environment, in such a stage that there is a place for 3-star hotels as well as 4 5-star hotels. So there is a place for many different kind of portfolios that we've seen across the Europe that are upscale, but also for the premium players to come in and to build up the scale and to provide the better quality accommodation that's out there now. And here is just a comparison of not only what type of the rooms there should be to build, but about amenities as well, because communal areas and amenities is something that defines the student housing. When we do a lot of these constructions and we work on a lot of these developments across the globe and in Canada as well, we always make a big significant note about your communal areas. We're talking about the students. They like to be part of something. And of course, you have to take into consideration that your customer is both student and the parent. So you need to basically have a place that is enjoyable for students and secure for parents. So the parents will be happy to send those students to this accommodation, and it will be providing everything usually under one bill. What we see in the more major markets is the proportion of the communal areas on the total GBA, so the gross building area, sits usually between 12 to 13%. Might be seen as a high number and quite a lot to sacrifice from your square foot that you have potentially for the rooms, but amenities are something that defines the quality of the accommodation. This is the kind of a spirit of the asset. And I like to use, especially for new developments, we've seen a lot of luxury developments in Spain or in Australia. And when we visited those assets, and even when I was touring assets here in Toronto or in Kelowna or in other places, you always see one nice case study what I would like to use is usually when you see new developments, people tend to develop single rooms. So if these students have single privacy, they have a place to study, they can just close the door, have total privacy to study. But you're still going to see those students coming down to the study rooms. And moreover, all those students have earphones. They're not even talking to each other. So they, rather to use their privacy, they come downstairs, sit next to the 10 students with their earphones, but they feel they're part of something. They just feel they're part of some kind of a community and they don't feel like a stranger. And it's very important to scale it up this way, to provide a quality accommodation that allows the students to have this community and to interact with their colleagues or with their friends. It is improving in Canada a little bit. That's a good sign. So if we take a look at these graphs, the gold one are the on-campus accommodation, still mainly focusing on just providing the place to sleep and just do the washing and the laundry. But if you take a look at the off-campus assets, the dark blue represents the older stock, while the light blue represents the stock that has been developed in the last 5 years. And it's great to see this improvement, that this number and percentage of residences that are deploying these communal areas or the services into their assets is increasing. We see even much higher of those numbers in other countries like Europe or Australia, but this exactly is something that we need to be focusing more, not only providing accommodation, but also providing a community to those students. And of course, it depends where you build. And of course, depends what's the micro location. To use example from Europe and Canada, when you build asset in Netherlands, not sure how many of you have been there, but you know, the Amsterdam is a city where everyone drives a bike. Bikes are everywhere. So indeed, if you build an asset in Amsterdam, you're going to have a huge bike storage. But if you go to Madrid or Barcelona, and you're going to be visiting those assets, you will be seeing a lot of assets with the rooftop terrace, with a sometimes super luxury, with the pools even on top, etc. So the product offering differs. And similarly in Canada, when I was visiting assets in Waterloo, I saw places with a huge cinema, with a huge parking places. When I asked the manager whether it's used, well, not really. I went to Toronto. Parking and cinema was the most used amenity because, well, not much to do, right? So, of course, it's like 2-hour difference of the drive, and the amenity offering and the importance of the amenity was totally different. So we need to respect the micro location, the market we're building in, the surrounding competition, but also the options for the students, but as well where the students are coming from, what can they afford, and build different type of accommodation. And of course, this quality of accommodation that is defined by both room offering and amenities is then reflected in the rents that you can ask. Quite surprisingly, you can already see the rents in student housing in Canada, especially for single studio for off-campus, is the second highest rents when we compare it to UK, to Spain, to Australia, even France, Germany. So maybe, for example, a couple months ago, both me and Julia, our research director, we went to visit many of the openings in Europe. And there have been a lot of openings, especially in Spain and Italy, that are here on this graph, that open these super luxury assets, like with a rooftop terrace, rooftop pool, super high rents. On the average, the market is much more mature. There are much more institutional capital, more kind of pension funds already active, consolidated portfolios are there, but the rents are still not achieving the figures that we see in Canada. And Canada is in a totally different stage in those markets. So on one hand, it might be attractive for investment point of view. If people see, yeah, is the high rents, investors would like to tend to see, that in those countries. On the other hand, not such a bad thing for the students, right? To see that number being the second biggest number. But where does it come from? Why is the number so low or so high? If we do, like we do every year, assessment of the rent levels on global scheme, how the rents are changing on city, on country level, there is one pattern which follows, and it's provision rate. So how the market is measured. how many options are there for students, how many beds are there, how many competition is there. And with the more competition, the bigger number of the beds, the rent level pressure is, of course, much smaller than the markets where the beds are missing. And unless we solve this situation, we will not necessarily stop this rent growth to continue in such a pace. So we need to think long term. We need to think how to solve this problem. We need to find a solution that will bring quality accommodation, diverse accommodation, and attract additional capital to boost this accommodation construction, so we can eliminate at least partially the rent growth that we're seeing in Canada and make it affordable, more affordable. And where the market is heading, we did kind of a forecast from all the data we have for demand and for the pace of the openings, construction, and supply that's out there. The current provision sits at 10%. Looking at 2030, where the market might be if we continue with the same pace we have now, the provision will be at 12.7%. It's still an extremely low number. And if we continue with this pace, with this number of the openings, respecting the annual growth of the student numbers, the situation will be not improved at all. So this is just a story that gives us kind of a mirror to everyone, to all the parties that are involved in this situation and in the accommodation sector, especially governments, especially also it's great to see that there is a forum where universities and private accommodations can talk at one table, because we need to discuss this more frequently and more together. Like, we had a webinar a couple of weeks ago, where we had multiple people, multiple companies, different sectors. So finance institution like Cindy, Jonathan from Harrison, Language Canada, Veronica from Slate, Andrew from UBC, and so on. So we tried to make the audience to understand the view of everyone and how can we work together to find a solution that will fast track all these new construction that might come to the market. Because if we continue as we are now, we see the situation is not improved, and it just will provide additional constant pressure on the rents, on the students, and on the reputation of the country as such. So one of the things that we've been hearing in the country is that there is a missing transparency, and there is a hard access to the data, which we try to solve. So we are here for some time. We managed to put together an interactive platform which consists of all the operational assets, on-campus, off-campus, product offering, information per asset, micro location. You can easily benchmark, log in, download the data, view it, and work with it. So there is probably just a starting point that transparency is improving. We try to help the market to get there, like we did in other markets, like that has been in the same stage now. The platform is available. If you want to test it, if you want to have a taste of it, just reach out to me after the conference. We can easily provide you the access, and happy to follow up with any discussions you might have. So thanks for the attention, and looking forward to the conversation we had today.